This is Sidra Noor, a first-year MA English student. I would like to express my heartfelt greetings to each and every one of you. Your presence here today is truly appreciated. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this insightful panel discussion. In an era marked by technological advancements and evolving narrative forms, the realm of graphic narratives has emerged as a captivating medium that transcends traditional boundaries of literature. Through the seamless integration of vivid visuals and compelling storytellings, graphic narratives offer a unique and immersive experience captivating readers of all ages. Within the Indian literary landscape, graphic narratives are a fairly new emergence and a lesser-known genre in general. Major publishers are, however, taking this genre more seriously as of late, with a variety of visual textual storytelling having been featured in recent big anthologies. In the past 2 decades, graphic narratives in India have seen huge shifts, both in form as well as content, from mythology-based narratives to more sober, real-world focused subjects. Welcome to this captivating session on narratives retold, emergence and literary transition into the realm of graphic narratives. Today, we have the great privilege of bringing together a panel of esteemed experts who will delve into the fascinating intersection of storytelling, art, and imagination. Prepare to embark on a journey of exploration and imagination as we unravel the secrets behind the power of graphic narratives. Get ready to be inspired, challenged, and enthralled as our esteemed panelists share their wealth of knowledge and personal experiences in the ever-evolving realm of storytelling. I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists as we embark on this captivating exploration of narratives retold. First, we have Professor Vishwajyoti Ghosh, who is the author of the graphic novel Delhi Calm, a political graphic novel set in the 70s, and a visual book of postcards, Times, New Roman, and Countrymen. Ghosh is also the creator of a cartoon column, Full Toss, in Hindustan Times edit page every Sunday. Besides his earlier columns like Backlog in Little Magazine and Acid Test Down to Earth, his comics are regularly published in various journals and anthologies, both in India and in abroad. Both in the sagacious knowledge of history, politics, social reforms, traditional Indian art forms of modern graphic novel techniques, everything tries, but nothing succeeds in going past his ken. We welcome you, Mr. Vishwajyoti Ghosh. Next, we have Ms. Afra Shafiq, who is a multimedia artist based out on Goa, India. Ms. Afra Shafiq has worked on a graphic publication, Dates.Sites on 20th Century Bombay, Mumbai, that was anchored to its most popular public institution, the cinema. Her engagement with the project was to imagine, source, and interpose with a story told in the text, a body of visual imaginary that would create its own narrative that was far from umbilical but rather playfully associative. Another of her projects includes Connected, a TV series by filmmaker Paromita Vohra that looked at the inner lives of women in Bombay told through their video diaries. Her work moves across various mediums, drawing from handmade language of traditional folk forms and connecting them to the digital language of the internet and video games. Her work has also been included in the 2023 Dhaka Art Summit, 2nd Lahore, 4th Kochi Muzris, and the 8th Asian Art Biennales, besides other exhibitions in India and abroad. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel discussion. With a wealth of experience and a deep understanding of the topic at hand, our moderator is well equipped to guide us through this engaging and insightful session. Mr. Abdullah Parvez, the Secretary of Raleigh Literary Society. He's also a national level debater and has been the forum in charge and coordinator of forums and workshops at University Debating and Literary Club, Aligarh Muslim University. He has published academic papers and has academic interests in digital humanities and comic studies. I once again welcome our panelist and moderator for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Sidra, for that humbling introduction. I mean, to say all of that in front of the likes of Professor Vishwajyoti sir and Ms. Afra ma'am, I think is something that, is very daunting to hear, to have the wealth of knowledge in graphic narratives and comic studies or interactive fiction. I mean, I think It is barely that I've touched upon it, but I must admit my nervousness here on my end, sir and ma'am, because I'm in awe of facing you both. I've been dealing with graphic narratives and comic studies as a young researcher since quite some time, but the whole work began with reading works like Delhi Calm. The interest being stemming from there. And now that I've actually come into this field, I must tell everyone here present as well that the syllabus here of digital humanities also has Afra ma'am's work, Enter Sultana's Reality, as a prescribed work to study. Yes, and that is where we got introduced with her work, and it was absolutely incredible to see that kind of work being produced, and we did not know such a space actually exists. So the questions that I will have here, ma'am and sir, will be drawn from my own experience as a young researcher also, questions that would be on the end of seeing as a practitioner and academician both. Uh, uh, how do we deal with this emerging realm of graphic narrative and of the topic at hand we have of narratives being retold? And I wish we could have had you both on campus as we had actually planned. That would have been incredible to have the Kennedy Auditorium filled with people listening into graphic narratives, and especially because I've seen the reception of people wanting to listen into this topic since the past year. Last year I'd been into a conference in the Miranda House in DU, and it was on graphic narratives, and we could see that the space is something that young researchers are looking into more deeply now, and it would have been incredible for that space to have expanded out to a more diverse audience. But we're going to use this platform for now, and hopefully have you all, both on campus the next time, and see the reception on ground for that. With that, I would like to begin the first question, which is on a both basic level, and you know, what I've understood in terms of the graphic narrative space that and how it pans out, and it has been a space that has been in the world since quite some time. But in the Indian space, it's been relatively very recent, beginning only in the 21st century. And you may correct me if I'm wrong, of course, and if my observation is misunderstood. The question is to both of the panelists, that what made this emergence take place, and how does the space of graphic artists, and especially a graphic artist who's also an academician, view its importance to be? I would like Vishwajyoti sir to first begin with the answer. Uh, yes.
Thank you, Abdullah. A big hello to all the scholars here, and thank you for having us. A big hi to Afra, my dear old friend. I'm seeing you after ages, and yeah, and we worked together, in fact, in the past, some 12 years back, on a common project, and Afra and I are familiar with each of the others' work, both though, and now it's mainly through Instagram that we know where life is going. So, your question as to why this new emergence or why this new interest, it's, I think the basic reason is that we are living in a post-pandemic visual world now. I mean, more than ever. I mean, more than ever, the content is getting created. More than ever, the visuals are getting created. And we are living in we are negotiating with visuals all the time, right? So I think one of the interests is also that, and then also people are now exploring these platforms itself, like Instagram or TikTok or Snapchat or whatever, as platforms of publishing and as visual platforms of publishing. And when it comes to that, they're also creating their own narratives. They're creating their own content in their own way, which is very unique to that particular platform. They're not trying to push print on an Instagram, or a PDF into a Snapchat. So they are trying to, the practitioners of this new mediums are actually trying to create content which is suitable to that particular platform, which is brings to their own interest, a preliminary interest of comics and graphic novels. I mean, graphic novels is basically comics, right? So comics has been there forever. We've all read a comic. Some of us would have tried writing a comic in school and then given up. Some of us probably collaborated with a friend or two. Some of us thought that idea, but then there were not many visual languages or even opportunities or softwares available in those days. Especially in my time, there was nothing but pen and pencil. So you didn't have Photoshop, you didn't have After Effects, you didn't have Illustrator, all of that. And now, in a post chat GPT world, you don't even need that. You just need to write the text and something will emerge for you, right? So where this whole concept of visual negotiation is changing, both in terms of practice and in terms of acceptance of the content or consuming the content. The interest is basically a sense of curiosity that brings in initially, and then probably the form holds for itself. Afra has in fact worked on another level. She has taken it to animation. She has worked in multimedia, and from the content that she has worked on. So my reading is that the the practice, it's always in a form of constant work in progress. So Afra.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thank you for that warm introduction, Sidra. I hope we can actually make this conversation as exciting as you've promised it to be. And thank you for having me, Abdullah, and everybody else as part of the organizing committee. And Vishwajyoti, it's actually really nice to see you here. And the very first project that I've worked on in my life is when Vishwa had already, of course, finished Telecom and had a whole body of work under his arm. And we were both fellows at the same institute, and which is where I actually made Sultana's reality. So it's quite like funny and special to be back here so many years later and speaking about our work. And about what you were saying, Abdullah, I was just thinking about it also. I feel like what is a graphic narrative if not a combination of the image form and the text form, right? And I feel like the image form as a storytelling technique is actually really, really old. Like cave paintings told you a story within that, and the image has been used to mark storytelling through time. And if you look at, like various forms of folk art, for example, if you look at a Patachitra, like what is it if it's not a graphic story without text? You have panels, you have a flow of the eye, you have movement, you have time, you have narrative that unfolds. Sometimes you have punchlines and leaving you at like I don't know, like a edge of your seat feeling. So there is a whole structure and logic to visual storytelling that I feel kind of far predates what we think of officially as comics. And then I think that it's also a lot more accessible because of like it works across no matter what language you speak. If you eliminate text from it altogether, then you don't have to have the problem of literacy. And so I think that storytelling through images is actually like a lot more entrenched into our own understanding of not only reading the images as story, but also expressing stories through images. And I think that the interesting combination of the two of them might be like the coming in of text might be a much more newer thing, obviously, because it comes in with a certain kind of literacy, a certain kind of existing in print techniques or whatever. But then it kind of does new things to the medium, because then you have a new language that comes. You have the idea of perspective, you have the idea of shots, you have the idea of a thought or a dialogue or an aside or a point of view of a certain character, and then the whole like a whole other language of that medium slowly starts developing. And we I don't know, like a lot of us grow up reading like Tinkle comics or Archie's comics or whatever. And so but what I think is interesting now is that I think somehow the comic book was looked at as a very like space for a child, right? Or like something that was for childhood, or this whole like Marvel fantasy genre, which is still adults may read it, but it's also still in the in the sort of realm of like the supernatural or the whatever. Like whether it's, I mean, comics would have either mythology or superheroes, or then children's stories, for example. And I think that at least in India, the emergence of graphic novels for adults might be fairly recent, where they're talking about, I don't know, deeply emotional or complex political, or like using the form as as an essay or whatever. And I think that and when I say recent, obviously I don't mean as recent as like, or a decade or whatever. There are artists who are among us who've been making graphic novels, who have been sort of moving beyond the typical idea of a comic is a space of play and childhood. And I think that's quite interesting. And then, of course, like Vishwa said, um, the fact that now, like, you don't necessarily, I mean, what are memes? Memes are also comics in a sense, right? Like, and you create a language for it, and you have a meme generator, and you have a thought or an idea. And sometimes the memes are only understood by a very small niche group, but they're so specific and they're so funny to that niche group, and anyone can make them. So I think the advent of a lot of digital technologies and ways of expressing on the internet has then moved the language and the possibility, I think, a bit further in the recent past.
Thank you. Thank you for starting off with that, ma'am. And I think my next question is followed upon what ma'am you were talking about. And uh, one of the things that we are able to observe, and I don't know if this is a more layman kind of viewpoint to look at from, but we see that the space of interactive fiction, where mostly your work comes into, is basically seen as a merging of both the graphic and the digital space, or the graphic moving into the digital space. So, as someone who's specific into the digital space, do you find that viewpoint to be constrictive? Is that a constrictive viewpoint, or is it something that is seen as in a positive light, that it is just the usage of that form in another medium?
Hmm. I don't know. I feel like because there was no intentionality with like, oh, now I'm going to make X thing, and therefore this is what I think of it as. Like I feel like for me, the form develops very much out of play and experimentation of just trying something, like when I started working on Sultana's Reality, I actually didn't know what form it was going to take. I thought it would be like a couple of videos maybe, but then at some point I felt like the linearity of the video was annoying me. Like I didn't want to tell a story where I was like, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end. I felt like there was a lot of simultaneity to the story, like this happened, but while this happened, this also happened. And so then the form or the structure becomes almost like a river with multiple tributaries that are simultaneous, And then I kept thinking, like, what would be the form that allows that? And then that's how this sort of developed, right? And then once I made it, I would really struggle to like explain what is it. I mean, like I have to use many sentences, right? It's research based, it's an archive, but it's online, but it has this game like what now everyone calls gamification, which wasn't like like a hot word at that point, I guess. And it's interactive and whatever. But I think that along like I went further on in different projects. I think that for me, what is interesting is, apart from the fact that yes, it's something that uses the image and the text in almost the same like same kind of importance or darja is given to both of those things, and each of them are kind of dancing together rather than it's being about only the image or only the text. Like that is, I think, the main thing that holds through. But the form for me, I think I like to allow for play. And so play, whether that happens through an interactive fiction or through a more traditional game format, which is something that I worked on my most recent project, which is a game, or and that again is like a whole contested thing. What is a game itself is like, a whole other nadi. But so I feel like I'm not actually so concerned about like, do I think about this as interactive fiction? Do I think about it as graphic narrative? I think like think about it as something that involves play, and like it's there. I don't know. I'm not so concerned about labeling in that sense.
The same question I would ask Vishwajyoti sir to you in a vice versa sense of how do you view, I mean, because we are moving so much quicker into the whole digital space. And though I would like to speak on this from, again, a young researcher's viewpoint, that in my reading of anthologies, graphic narratives and their anthologies, a very interesting point to note there is how there are writing styles which differ with every writer. The artistic style with the pen also differs from every graphic artist to another. And I think that is much more difficult to replicate or create through the medium of even AI as such. So, do you think this transition into the interactive space, interactive fiction space, should be seen as a more natural and something that is not a counter or a narrative, but rather that one complements? And another question being the space of AI being difficult in terms of replicating or even replacing graphic narrative. How do you view all of that as?
See, as Afra said, I think many of the people who create anything, it's not because they're trying to make a statement or something. It's just that they would like to create and see for themselves how far they can go. And they are the first readers themselves, or the listeners, or the viewers, or the participants. When Afra was working on this, it was not that she was planning to do this kind of thing this way. She was also experimenting, and I know the kind of technical things that she had to go through. It was quite a nightmare, in fact, to present it at that point of time, because of the available technology or the limitations of it. So, it was not that, there was a certain set paradigm that she was trying to attempt. It was just seeing how much we can take this content forward the way I want to tell this particular story. So that happens with all of us, that that we know a few things and we don't know many of those things. And how much can we work embellishing these two things together to create a story that we want to tell, or probably that we also don't know what will emerge, but it emerges, that kind of a thing. So I think, it's a constant work in progress. I mean, for example, Sultana's reality is very different from the one I saw, from the version I saw. Similarly, a lot of the work that happens even in anthologies is actually people coming from different vantage points and taking their practice, not trying to be like each other, but telling you a story from where they are set at that point of time. So, and that's what probably makes anthology more interesting and has more energy to it, right? Think of it as a larger exhibition where different artists are showing up and or performing or whatever. In terms of what Afra said, I mean, the next extension is the whole extension of digital technology is not a counter. It's just a natural extension. I mean, if I was writing letters by hand and now I'm writing an email, I mean, it's just not a counter. It's not that I can't write long form handwriting. My handwriting is terribly bad. But the fact remains, obviously, I will write an email now. So the point is that it's a very natural process that is one is going through and evolving, and then, playing along with it. In terms of AI, it's still work in progress. I mean, right now we are in the stage where it has just emerged into a collective back pocket, and we can see the machines outdoing each other. We can see algorithms fighting it out with each other. We can see corporates fighting it out with each other, that whose AI is better than the other. And every day you are just trying to catch up, and you're like that monkey who's going 2 steps up on the pole and 5 steps down, and then the calculation is where you are right now. So that's what that's the situation with AI. As of now, I don't think it will replace anything, but it will definitely create a new platform or a new language for sure. People will learn to negotiate with it. Machines will learn more than they are based on the data they have right now, and it will be a new thing altogether. And I mean, the world is not going to get divided between AI and non-AI. It's not going to be there won't be these binaries. Like, there's no binary between my work and Afra's work. I mean, her work is her work, or the kind of work she does.
So it
But
will become a natural extension as it is at
yeah,
seen at
so
the
I mean,
moment.
people will play, people will see. Eventually, I mean, whether it's Patachitra, whether it's or live work or a gaming, there's an element of performance that's involved, right? A human performance that's involved, or a human interaction, or a human presence that's involved. Even the way Sultana's reality, for example, if the website is curated in that sense. So it's the author's take on that streams you down, and you have to navigate it accordingly. It's not like a free for all. So the sense of authorship will always be there, whether it's AI, whether it's analog where it's digital. Yeah.
Right, sir. I think that answers it well. I will take a bit of a turn and move into maybe the specific work that both of you have done. First, to you, Vishwajyoti sir. Uh, uh, the Delicom deals with the retelling of the emergency period, retelling in a form of a graphic narrative of the 1970s in graphic format. Uh, the question is, what prompted you to deal with this topic? I would like you to answer this both on a personal and an impersonal level.
I don't know. I think for me, the answer is mostly personal. Personal being, that's not the first book I wanted to write. The first book I probably wanted to write was my life in an art college. And no one knows it, where the college is in my city. And people don't know what people do there. So they think they just go there, paint the whole day and come back. So that's what an art school looks like. So I wanted to probably do a first book on what my life in an art school was. But the problem that happened is that by the time I passed out, the year I passed out, Photoshop happened, and everything that we learned was some completely irrelevant. So we are from the generation we used to take those big portfolios and chug it in DTC buses and go to a office to get a job or something and show our work, and everything was hand drawn and all of that, hand painted and all of that. The whole concept of evaluation and grading was so archaic. It was about your finishing. It was about the how realistic could you make a picture. I mean, if you're drawing a picture, it should be like a picture, in my opinion. It should not look like a photograph, right? So, but the whole concept of advertising or concept of what you call commercial art was like that. So by the time I passed out, everything that I was holding in my hand was completely irrelevant. And then I thought, who will want to read my book now? It's so irrelevant. So I never worked on it finally. Then I was then I was doing my MA, and then I was assisting a friend who was working on a film on the emergency, and then and I was just thinking back of my time when I was just 3 or 4 when the emergency happened, and what the situation was in the house, and what were the conversations. And I just reading up more, and I was thinking, oh my god, there's so much visual possibility to it. How about exploring this? Then I started talking to a lot of people who were there at that point of time, who were active, and then so many of these stories came out, and I was just like getting a more visual, a visual world was opening up. And it was a great opportunity to relook at Delhi of the Delhi that I had grown up in. That's how probably Delhi Calm started. I mean, it was not there to make a statement in the sense. My only statement was that I should release it by the time the party that imposed the emergency is in power when this book is released. So if it has to get banned, it has to get banned right now. So that was the only thing, and I managed to bring it out. During that time, I managed to have my first launch in Teen Murti Bhavan, which was like out and out that particular party's domain in that sense. So yeah, so I got those right ticks at the impersonal level, but but in terms of creating the book, I think it was more of a personal level. Um Interestingly, I would just say the book came at the right time. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. But with that, of course, I understand all the viewpoints that have been given what went into writing the book or making the book. But the political thought that also goes behind it is something that we must understand. I mean, is it a necessary criticism that you felt regarding that particular period, or was it trying to, through that instance, draw on a bigger criticism for that particular party?
No, it was not a criticism for the party.
Mm,
It was a criticism for the act itself,
mm,
and the way it unfolded. It was not criticism for any particular party. Any, it was not about a party. It was about power.
wow. All right.
Emergency was about power.
Exactly.
I mean, the same thing can happening, or maybe some people say is happening without imposing an emergency. It's embedded, right? So it's about power. So the whole concept was negotiating the citizen negotiating with power, or and working with it. I mean, if you go to a restaurant and it says don't talk politics here, It's like, or someone says work more, talk less, or someone says go to office on time, and someone says, oh, the great thing was that the trains ran on time. It's just basic that any country should have its trains running on time. It can't be a great plus for an era, right? So it's not about a particular party at all. In fact, I have talked about every party and how they have played this thing out in that book itself. So it was not about one particular party. And one particular party was probably in the helm of it and driving it. But it's actually about the addiction of power.
Thank you. Thank you. That brings a lot of clarification to the whole idea also and what goes into it and what goes behind. I think when you're writing something which is politically driven, the clarity of thought that goes behind it is very important because one thing can mean so many things. I mean, with the answer that you've given, it feels that, now it has become a more universal thought that it does not matter who it was at that point. It is the abuse of power that you were trying to comment on, and that can now be seen in a more grandeur sense or of a more global sense, and many instances come, and now my question completely topples on itself, and I think that was very important to be understood. I mean, what goes behind, and I'll get back to this question in another format. Before that, I would like to ask you that you've used archival images of women, and the stories have been through history and the relationship with books has been depicted through your work and the Sultan's reality. The same question of how and what prompted you to take up with this specific topic, because if I'm not wrong, this would fall somewhere also in the feminist theoretical sense of things as well, and that is a topic which is uh, you know apart from it being a burning issue, is has multiple viewpoints that you can actually approach it from, and have your own you know narrative addition to it. So, what made you choose this particular topic to work on?
Um, I mean, again, it wasn't something that I had sort of decided that I'm going to work on, the women's education history or whatever, or even their relationship with books. But it was a fellowship that we had gotten from the IFA with the Center for Studies in Social Sciences in Calcutta, which had a visual archive. And I was interested in looking at the images of women in that archive. And then let's see where it goes. Like, it was very like an open-ended sort of research project. And it actually, I think, was also sometimes failures also interestingly lead you to like a direction that you might not have kind of taken unless there was a failure. So I think that idea was a bit of a, like, I just proposed this idea without actually thinking through it. And then once I reached the archive to work, at that stage, it was a digital archive, but it was not a digitized archive, which means that they just had hard drives after hard drives with images inside them, but they didn't have like a metadata or a search engine where you could be like images of women and they're tagged like this and like whatever. And they had files and folders of what are their image lists, but the information was very like, this is the year, is it a photograph, is it a painting, is it a map, and who is the donor. So by looking at those files, you actually had no sense if an image had a woman in it or not. And I was like, my God, I'm screwed. Like, how am I going to do this now? Because there was a very large body of images in that archive. And so I kind of started doing the, like, I think out of panic, because I was just like, I don't know how to navigate this idea. I just started like spending every day just going to the archive and opening folders and looking at the images and closing the folders. And if I happen to come across an image of a woman in a folder, I would like kind of take a screen grab of it so that I would know, okay. So it's some way I started doing with, like, now in retrospect, I see that I was sub-archiving an archive, I was creating from one collection a smaller sort of collection of like, what are all the images of women in the CSSC archive. And while doing that act, after like doing it kind of mindlessly for some time, I started realizing there were certain very specific kind of larger themes that were recurring a lot in the images. So for example, one of the very wide themes were like women daydreaming. So you'll see lots and lots of images of women sitting by a window and just like blank expression looking out of a window, or you will see like images of like Shungar, dressing up, getting ready, combing their hair, like doing something. Or you would see like images where there would be only women in that image. There would be no presence of male. And it would mostly be indoors. So it was like a very under mahal kind of imagination. And over there, you would see the body language would be most relaxed. They would be like lying down in each other's laps and like making a braid for somebody's hair, laughing, giggling. So, these kind of like recurring imaginations kept coming up, and I would quite easily be able to slot them, saying, this is the imagination of woman as this or that or whatever. But then when I reached this very large sample size, which was that any image that had a woman and a book in it. There were a lot of images of this that would keep coming up, but I was finding it very difficult for me to very easily slot the idea behind those images, because in some of the images, the women would be very absorbed in the book, like they would be reading as if they love what's in the book, and they're kind of, I don't know, like they're not even aware of what's happening around them because they're so into the book. In some situations, the book and the woman would be there, but there would also be like a teacher who's usually like an older man who's sitting on a more higher pedestal and teaching. So the book is not in the hand of the woman, but it's something that she's learning from. And then in some situations, you would very evidently feel like the book is the enemy. Like this woman wants to like sleep, but then like she's like lying down on the bed, but she has this book and she's looking very irritated about it. Or she has some needlework, but then this book is there and she's like glaring at it. And then there were all of these like early photographs, like studio photographs, in which these very, very young girls are, dressed in these very formal studio portraits with a book in their hand. And I was like, what is that book there? Why is that the prop? And so I felt very intrigued in this presence of the book that showed up in many ways. And then I thought, okay, let me unpack this relationship through the project. And so answering that then became like the starting point. So it wasn't something that I had set out planning to do. And of course, it's a sort of I think that it's not only just looking at the history of the women's education movement, but it is also like a feminist perspective on it for sure, because it doesn't, I mean, it's going beyond this slogan like Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao type of idea, but it's putting women's agency at the center of it, because I don't think that the beginnings of the women's education movement in the colonial English women's education movement for women in this country, I don't think it actually started because people like the men felt that they want women to be educated and equal performing and contributing members to society. That wasn't why women were educated. They were educated for multiple other reasons, but it wasn't women's agency that was at the center of it. And so I'm also looking at that history, because at some level there was this sort of class of men who were emerging, who sort of really started idealizing everything that had to do with the British, and this sort of, very um, almost embarrassed of their own Indianness. And the women's, like the fact that the women were uneducated was looked at as undesirable, because they weren't like the English women, and they wanted their women to be educated only because they could make better company in society, could quote some poetry and like read some texts and like whatever. And so then the access of like so who got educated in which household for what purpose and in which subjects is very specific. The women weren't given initially like political science and a history book. So they were, yes, literature was there, devotional text was there, but it was very enough to kind of educate yourself, enough to then be able to educate your child and, make pleasant conversation, maybe do some accounts for your husband on the side, and that was it. And then you see also the pushback to that, and the way that it was claimed despite that imagination, not aided by that imagination. I think that's what then the project kind of ended up becoming about.
I think that very clearly puts a lot of points into clarity. I mean, a very important thing that you have pointed out here, ma'am, is the idea of how absences can also mean presence, where there, I mean, a lot of spaces should bring up the question why a certain depiction of identity was not there, especially why was a specific section completely removed. or not considered to be depicted. I think that is a very important idea that you played into. Also, how I mean, again, from the perspective of a young researcher, I think a lot of times even when you begin with an idea which is daunting in beginning at the beginning because of the unavailability of material, and I think what you have done here is also transform the physical archival from which you had taken things out into a digital archival. So that is one very important work that came out of this. And another is, I think, from which also a question comes out is a lot of times in discovery and research of material, even if it begins with a very scanty collection, it turns out into more than what you can actually constitute in the whole project. So was that something that you also faced, that, in the end, that you wished you had put in more, and you discovered more, and but the project did not allow you to, and maybe there are more narratives to be told, and we have barely scratched the surface, maybe, or something along those lines.
I mean, I just also want to clarify, like, so the archive was it was already digitized. The
Yeah.
images, I was not looking at hard copy images. It was not what, like today, what they consider digital archive is not just that your images are scanned on a computer with
Oh,
a code, but it's like an archive that you can navigate through a search engine. That is considered digital archive, which it wasn't at that stage. But I think that, no, I think that I did. I wouldn't say that there was a lot more like space or possibility to work with that particular archive that was like not realized, because I think that then my entire project became about like what is it that I found in this archive, and then what is like how can I extrapolate that to like a larger moment in history, right? So I think by the end of that fellowship, I had seen all the images of women in that archive. Like I had exhausted that resource, and I feel like also beyond the point, obviously the project is very like it very liberally uses these images, which in another situation, another context, if we had to like buy rights per image, something like it obviously wouldn't be so excessive. But it very liberally uses these, and yet it hasn't used. I mean, there were hundreds of images that I saw that I didn't end up using. Also, the archive was pretty rich in that sense. But then it was repetition. It was like you've already kind of. It's like you have 50 sunrise shots. Okay, the day has started. We can use one and move on. So it was like this. But archives in general is especially if you're working with a pre-existing institutional archive, this thing that you say is something that is very fascinating, because archives have big gaps. There's a certain kind of thing that is considered of interest to archive, and it depends on whose archive it is, what was the intention, what was the whatever. And often archives are spaces where the lives of people in power and people who come from sort of, I don't know, like, I mean, if we're talking about people's lives that are being archived, the it's either people um, who hold resources and powers, and kind of want to create certain images of what their lives and legacies were like, that make it into the archive, or there is this sort of outsider gaze where somebody is going to a particular community or a particular tribe or a particular like group of people, and then making this sort of almost like ethnographic study of another, and then that makes it in the archive, but it isn't actually told from within that community, or their own voice is making the archive. So archives are very, I think, very like you need to kind of constantly look at material within the archive with a very critical gaze, and also be kind of hyper aware of like what isn't here, and then work, like you're saying, with what isn't here, then becomes like an interesting starting point often.
Yes, ma'am, of course. I think we'll right again. We'll steer the conversation into another direction of where our topic meant to come at was of where it all began, and the concept note that we had also provided about being narratives being retold. History has always been proof of how the emergence of a genre and goes on to retell existing narratives, and each depiction in diversified genres has had a specific impact and is targeted to a specific audience, if not in purpose, gets targeted to a specific audience. So in this emerging genre of graphic narratives or interactive fiction, where do you think, from the end of practitioners and academy who also hold academic caliber, would be the aim of the realm of graphic narratives and the interactive fiction. In terms of audience, its reception and the target, uh, it being also purposeful or not, and that will also help us understand the importance of the emergence of the genre. Vishay, sir, you could start with the answer if you would like.
I think if someone creates content, it's not as an academic or a non-academic. I mean, one creates content, or one creates a body of work, or one creates any work, it's because you want to tell that story at that point of time, and you would like to play or experiment it with that kind of a thing. It's not to not to set up an academic curriculum. I mean, we are academics by chance. We are essentially people of practice. Whether it's any of us who are committing to ourselves to the drawing board or our digital tablets every day, we are basically actually soldiers of practice in that sense. So we are not really setting out to do anything to work as academics. I mean, we can just transfer that kind of a learning, our own learning, as that's about it. But we are not here setting up a book that will help you get a better understanding or even a better grade. So it's just something that we want to do ourselves, that kind of a thing. So that's being the first part of your query. My other point would be is basically that when we set out to tell a story in a visual form, it's just not that we want to we want to do it visually because we don't want to write. Okay, it's just that we just want to tell it visually because that's where we feel we can have more fun at. Okay, it's just that it's just a form we feel that it's worth exploring. We exactly know what our numbers are like. As Afra said, I mean, the fact remains, I found my book in the children's book section when the book came out with Archies and Asterix and picture books. That's the truth. I mean, but that does not deter us from not working in our practice, because we know that even if there are 10 people who's going to read, there are more 10 like me that who are probably interested in. Then they'll pick it up somewhere and read it. I mean, so I mean, we have moved a lot from that space. I mean, we have a graphic novel shelf in the bookstores now. And when it comes to people like Afra who are working it digitally, I mean, they don't even know what the audience is like, because it's such a vast open world out there. So they don't know how many clicks they're getting every time someone's logging to the website or playing the game or whatever. That data, it's not that they're not the world, as big the world opens out for them, the lesser they get to know. I mean, I can go and ask a publisher, how many books sold, where's my royalty check? Well, for them, it's even a vaster field with lesser data, which they can really account for. But they know there are 20 people out there who are interested in this kind of a narrative or want to work like that. And they're creating it for those 20 versions of themselves. I mean, we all work with all that we know 20 meters around our house, effectively, around our universe. That's how anything gets created. Imagine Margaret Atwood coming and writing a book under the the market in Aligarh right now. She would not be able to do it, right? I mean, similarly, we will not be able to do something which we don't know much about, but just that what we can figure out. Factor is even Afra appropriated those kind of archival images, which has got nothing to do with the kind of narrative that she created. She reappropriated that into kind of a narrative that she wanted to create. It was not a Sultana reality, as far as I remember, did not come out of those images. But it worked the other way around, and then the images started talking to her in some way or the other, in the kind of in the lens that she probably evolved with. And that's how any graphic narrative, any visual, non-visual, I mean, when I say visual, I mean, even text can be used as an image. Uh, you know, uh, so, uh, so digital, non-digital, interactive, non-interactive. I remember meeting this guy who used to make these something called hypercomics, which is like end of the last century, and just the internet was like that many number of kbps kind of a thing, and then wi-fi was not a home thing. It was an internet cafe formula. He was making these things in Europe, and basically where you read a scroll down the story and you take a right and you click a right and that story moves a right, and then it has a different turn, and if you press left and it takes a different turn. And by the time I met him, which was like beginning of the 21st century, and he said, no, I'm not doing them anymore. And probably it's a lie that's been done with. Now it's a great time to do that again. In fact, in my opinion, but on a different platform probably. So these things will keep emerging, and our practice will also keep emerging. So there's nothing called what I call in graphic narratives. There's nothing called old school or old style, because that style is forever emerging. The art might look old world in terms of the aesthetic, but the telling will always be new. For example, look at Afra's work. It's archival images, but the telling is completely new. So that is the kind of thing that negotiation playing across time and space, that will keep happening.
So in some sort of the way, it can be said to be incidental rather than intentional. That you were more comfortable with this space and genre, and that's why you wanted to work with, rather than purposefully thinking that this might be a way to actually sort of uh, uh, be particular towards an audience. So this is more towards what an artist feels, rather than just seeing the intentionality behind where it could possibly reach to what audience level, if I'm not wrong.
No, in fact, I think the reverse. I think it's the practice is completely intentional.
All right.
I think we when we work, we'd like to know that the kind of genre or the kind of practice we are doing. That's I think very much intentional. In fact, discovering fellow readers is incidental. We don't know. We are putting our work out there. We don't know how many people will take it up, will read it, or flip a page, click a mouse. We don't know. That is incidental. But the practice, the idea of practice, I think that's intentional.
All right.
I don't think no one sets to create a work, ऐसे ही हो गया.
Of course.
It's never ऐसे ही हो गया. It's you set out to do something. We set out to do something. We might have ended up doing something different, but the intention of practice was definitely there.
All right. Ma'am, would you like to continue with that question?
I mean, just to start with your kind of thought about academics and graphic narratives. I forget this person's name, but I know that recently somebody submitted their master's thesis in the form of a comic, but it didn't actually have anything to do with graphic narratives or comics. It was just the form that he had chosen to do. And what ended up happening through that was that this person's thesis, just like the research in that thesis, just felt a lot more accessible to an audience that might not have accessed that paper, and then ended up getting published or read by a wider audience or whatever. And I obviously don't mean that like, oh, we don't need to have very academic research papers anymore and we should make them all graphic novels and comics. Not at all. Of course, there's like the importance of papers also, and very much they need to exist. But I do feel like the graphic novel form, or this like bringing together of a visual narrative, is a really good form for somebody who is like interested in research and academia but is also interested in making. I think it's like a great space to do that, because then I feel like it just kind of makes something a lot more easy to navigate and understand, feels less alienating for a certain kind of viewer / reader who may be interested in the ideas but might not have like the ability to make sense of a certain academic language, if that makes sense. or like say for example, I think my entry point into this world of like making what I do has also come from like it's a little like a roundabout like that, you know, because I studied literature and I was interested in writing, and I did feel like, oh, okay, you know, I will continue to like pursue literature and I will eventually like teach and write. And like this was, I think, my sense of what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. And I was until I like did some small certificate course in documentary filmmaking that was like a optional course in our college, and I really loved it because I felt like, not because, I mean, yes, I enjoyed filming or whatever, but it wasn't because I got obsessed with the camera, you know, but it was because I just felt like, oh, the film can also be like an essay, and I can, you know, say things through this form without actually using text. And then that became an interesting form for me, where instead of writing about nonfiction and research stuff, I was just like, oh, film and documentary, and kind of exploring that. And then eventually, then I started feeling frustrated by the linearity of it, and then I kind of started exploring other mediums. And then now I feel like the world of games is where, for me, I feel most like a comfortable, good match, you know. And I think that comes through like one's own journey of elimination, adding on, experimentation, whatever. But at the core, there's always like something that someone wants to say, right? And then you're finding ways that for you makes more sense to say. So, I mean, I know that not everybody can do this, but
So,
I feel somewhat um like thanking my stars that I don't actually have to think about like who is my audience going to be and how many like copies of this thing is going to be circulating in the market or whatever, because I guess I like get some sort of support to like just help me produce the work I do, and then after that it exists in the, I mean, for me it's important for whatever I make to be open source, online access for free, you know, like this is important to me. But with that, or it's just there, and sometimes I don't even like Sultana's reality, I didn't think that it would make the journey that it has, to be honest. It was something that I did out of a project and I had fun doing it, and I thought, okay, great, this is it. But then it's like you said, it's part of your course in your college. There are so many other universities that have written to me saying this, which was completely accidental. And there are so many that I don't probably even know, or like I don't know who looks at it in what way, and like how much time they spend with it or whatever. But then it's also been like this whole other journey with it, where it gets sort of invited to be shown at like a contemporary arts festival context, or like in a physical space, which was again completely unintentional. That's not how I imagined that work to live. And I like going for those things, because when you put Sultana's reality up as like a projection in a room, and you have people come in, I just like to quietly watch like what's happening, because the thing is like, to witness a person experiencing your work, I feel is like there's no greater learning than that, you know. And so some people, I feel like they just don't get it, they're afraid to click on anything, or they're just like, oh, whatever. And there's some people who like sit for hours. So I feel like as many kinds of work that exist, there are that many kinds of people, and not everyone can be like, ah, okay, for me it's fine, it doesn't matter if you know, my work has X viewers or X copies or whatever. Not everybody can make those choices, because um, I don't know. For me, success means that I have some way to be able to make my next work. If that happens, then I feel like, okay, it doesn't matter. Like the other stuff, because it's not commercial. I mean, basically, it's like in a weird place. I'm not inhabiting a commercial game space or a commercial like graphic novel space where there are yardsticks of like these many copies or these many buyers or like whatever. And so because I inhabit that non-commercial space, for me it's okay. Um, and of course, you're happy when people like engage with your work and enjoy it and write to you, whatever. But I don't think the numbers are at all in your mind when you're planning it, or when you're even like understanding whether you're happy with what you've made or not. Like they don't factor in, for me at least. Yeah.
It's a very interesting viewpoint. I mean, and also very different from, I mean, what a general person listening in would be expecting to hear it. Because generally, one thing that a person might assume is that, a shift in genre or exploration of such, especially when it comes to the digital space, can be seen in terms of where I want to have wide publicity, and I want that to happen, and to hear that that such reception was almost accidental. Like you do not expect it to go to the level it has, and of course that it has. That it will obviously be seen in a positive note, but to not have that thought at all, it's a very interesting perspective, and I think I'll build upon that with the next question that I have, and I think this is a bit more, I think, on a political end of things. The question that I have, because this is a discussion that we have been having in as student members of the society, and we engage in such discussion, and we have always seen that in a space such as in India, where a lot of mediums of telling, such as journalism and history, are now being distorted. There's a lot of distortion happening in that end. In such times, what we have felt through our analysis of whatever graphic novels we have indulged in, be it your work or Sanat Banerjee's work, or multiple graphic anthologies that we have kind of built an analysis, and it seems that these graphic narratives and or interactive fictions seem to counteract and present more accurate and true narratives. And this is something that I want that in terms of practitioners. Uh, of how you have practiced this to come to this point, and how do you see the future of it? Does this whole genre, which we feel also in terms of depiction of identities, it has been more accurate than other mediums like films, where there are more stereotypical depictions happening? So I would like both to comment on this very important thing that we all have been with concern and been discussing. Sir.
I th- I think what just to take off from where Afra left, that in terms of the numbers that you were talking about, and that leads to your second question. I think at that point in time when we are working, we just want to get the work done, right? We just want to get the work done and out. That's the first thing. So we're not thinking of numbers, we're not thinking of the space, we're not thinking of the reception. We know there's going to be no one but us. That's the prime, I think, the prism we work from. So we just want to get the work done. In terms of your thing of history being revised, history being rewritten, history or anything that will always be revised. That is humanity. That is things. That's the way things structures work. History will always be rewritten. History will always be revised. What you learned is wrong. What I learned is right. Let me tell you what's right. That has always been there, right? So there are as many versions of history and all that. And in terms of the form, I don't think this is the form that's leading to the accuracy. I think it's probably the time and the learning of the people who worked on it. Probably has what you think is accurate can be also be debunked as saying that this was one-sided. Tomorrow there can be practitioners who are completely doing the other end. Then how does that thing happen? And films. I mean, you talked about films. There are as many kinds of films, right? There is Garam Hawa on one side, which talks about the partition and negotiates with the partition, and then there could be some other film that is being done in this age, which is being now also propagated as the version of truth. And the intention in both is not anything lesser. Both of these practitioners think they're in the service of truth, right? Leave it to the audience, leave it to the thing. Of course, they're going to be biased histories. They're going to be biased retellings. They're going to be biased, projections. They're going to be biased forms of, storytelling. That's going to be there, but eventually, what will it's like the way AI is filling it out right now. It will get sorted out between what is the right version or what is not the right version, or what could be the midway version of it, and that's going to be happening all the time. I mean, think of it, any issue, you will find 5 different PhD papers in your own campus on the same issue, right? And 5 might have 5 different points of view. So yeah, I'll open it. Yeah.
Um, but so this idea that we have here also, like all of you discussed, like looking at this space to be some kind of savior, Would that be wrong? Because it feels like, if you were to work in this space at this moment to tell the narrative that you want, would actually be a more better medium than any other journalistic medium, or any other medium which has found more corruption in it right now, because our reading of it tells us that the graphic narrative space is still far away from it in the moment, at least.
I think it depends on the practitioners. I mean, if there are as many practitioners who are going to be working, who have a certain agenda, who want to tell the story that way, and then I mean, the stories will get that way. There's so much of reading and critique to, for example, our Chitrakatha for that matter. That that it has an agenda or whatever, that the picturization is lopsided or biased or whatever. Uh, Maybe it was not intentional, but probably the reading of it is that way now. Uh, I, for example, grew up on Amrit Chitrakatha, which I thought did serve its purpose of its time. But probably the reading now that is there also makes me rethink. Okay, fine. I mean, yeah, but everything evolves from one of the other, right? I mean, Amrit Chitrakatha emerged from calendar art, or the kind of folk art, or the Patachitras and all of that, and the way depictions were made. And depictions take a long time to change. I mean, I remember this whole Patachitra artist who had made this whole scroll on the World Trade Center bombings, and her reading was completely biased in that sense against a particular community. But she was in news because she's worked on this particular subject itself, and the subject becomes a novelty more than the story itself. And that is where practice becomes secondary to the subject, and that's currently happening a lot in films. The last topical two films which have been talked about so much in the national paradigm or the national platform are more to do with the subject and then the practice of the craft itself, right? Those kind of things will happen. People will figure out. And in terms of graphic narratives, I think still it has a long way to go, even in the academic circuit. When we opened up calls for this side, that side, which was a partition narrative, we received a lot of so-called the PhD thesis and all of that, and they had this just one concern. But Afra said, are you going to are you going to make my thing childish? Are you going to make my mere 7 saal ki mehnat? You're going to make it into a comic? I mean, you're sending it for a graphic narrative, dude. It's going to be a visual thing. But their concern is, how visual can it go? So that is the kind of thing that will. So for me, I believe, and Afra, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that if we want to create more readers, more viewers, we need more practitioners. And the more people practice, the more they get into it. The more they realize, and then the more they engage with it. So, whether it's academic, whether it's non-academic, whether it's a viewer, whether it's an Instagrammer, whoever, that engagement with the form is critical for anything to go forward. I mean, if there were no viewers in cinema halls, there would be no cinema, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
I would like
and
to.
just
Yes, ma'am.
sorry,
Yes,
just
yes,
want to
ma'am.
add something. Like,
Yeah.
and also, I don't think, Abdullah, inherently any medium is a safe space just by the
Yeah.
by the virtue of it being a certain medium. I mean, you had Charlie Hebdo, you had comic artists who have been like very much in the line of fire. You have had the idea of caricature itself that could become such a heightened space of offense or whatever. And I just exactly like what you were saying, it just depends on who is using that medium and what their politics and their own like intentions are, and then how the audience also responds to that. And then so I feel like, and that's really important actually, like this fact that like film has been used as a propaganda tool for ages. It is so entrenched in the history of film, but then film has also been like the complete opposite of it. It just completely depends on who made those films, but also who then like responded to them in what ways, and which films were still remembered and which films held on, and for then the film to feel like just incidental versus the film itself being something that is a new creation in this world is so evident to anybody, even if a person who's viewing the film charged with a certain kind of I don't know, like passion of whatever the film is trying to tell them. There is a truth to a medium in some way, right? Which I feel like does touch a person. And then those things do fall away or then are used further to certainly like propagate a certain whatever like agenda. Um, and then about this thing that you're saying, Vishwa, like yeah, like this idea of like, will it become a comic? Like that word comic actually is which is why I guess I don't know. I'm actually not very familiar with the history of like graphic novels and comic books. I don't know if that's, but maybe the word graphic novel just like helped give it more gravitas, because comics was just looked at as like, you know, something that was funny and childish and non-complex and non-nuanced, you know,
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, as a matter of fact, this thing, the graphic novel terms comes as a more of a marketing gig.
Mm.
If you ask, in the history of comics, when Will Eisner went to the publisher and said, I've to run this thing, which is like really serious. It's a contract with God and that kind of things. But he said, but the publisher said, but the damn, it's a comic.
Mm.
It either comes as a newspaper strip or it comes out as a comic.
Mm.
And this is content does not fit into the comic space, neither is it in the literary space.
Mm.
Then Will Eisner said, okay, let's use the term graphic novel then.
Nice.
And then, graphic novel starts a life of its own. So, till the term graphic novel come, I was always at a loss, at the end of the last century, how to describe myself. I mean, I can't even say I'm a comic artist because I'm not a stand-up. And, I'm neither am I doing comics in that sense. But that is the kind of thing. So yeah, graphic narratives, I think, just gives it a bit more kind of a academic sheen, which is why probably we are invited to the lit fests like these, or schools and colleges for talks. I mean, which the same institutions where comic reading was banned, if you remember, in school.
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I would go to the library. I remember the rule was that you can take one comic for every one proper book that you read. Like it was not a proper book.
It was a negotiation.
It was a negotiation. It was the candy, basically, the junk.
And in my school, I mean, we used to read the Amar under the desk, and if the teacher caught us, that she would take away the Amar and then probably reading it herself to brush up on her history in the staff room herself. So the form will keep moving, emerging, kind of a thing. In a different form. Now you have Insta comics, for example. I mean, you have a carousel of 10 images. And then
exactly. And it's also developing its own language actually now.
Developing its own language. I mean, see, the political cartoon, for example, has gone out of the newspaper, right? But the meme has arrived on our WhatsApp, right? That's another political cartoon, another form, right? So these forms will keep, it's like algorithms in AI, these forms will keep working with each other or against each other or for each other. But as long as there's a narrative or there's a story to tell and there are visuals to be seen, there will be an audience. That's my broad understanding in stage.
Yes, sir, and that you have talked about all of this, and then you also got into this distinction between what comic studies is and what graphic novels is, and not distinction as to how it's more of a marketing play also, and how giving it an academic worth and everything. And Pramod K. Nair also talks about this in his book. I mean, he goes at length to just give a distinction that the term graphic novel is specifically being used in terms of also the content that is being discussed, where graphic novels or graphic narratives is generally seen, even if we were to work on it, and if I was to say to someone that I'm working in comic studies, for me also, and to the person being addressed to, it would generally mean something in the space of, let's say, superheroes or all of those types of comics. But the moment I say graphic novels, the person gets also the question comes, what is this? And when and the explanation generally goes in the discussion of the content, that the content discusses more serious socio-political issues, and talks about does not dwell on the metaphorical sense of it, but the literal sense of what an event has taken place in. So I think that also, I think in terms of content also there is a distinction that's happening for what comic studies does, if I'm not wrong.
No, the thing is the other part of it is the fetishization of it. I mean, I've seen 1 page, 2 page comics. Part of a textbook and says a graphic novel. It's not a graphic novel.
Exactly.
It's a graphic story at best. But the fact remains, the graphic novel, the term, it becomes very loosely used, also as much because it's probably doing the rounds right now, or will have been doing for the last 10 years or something. But I mean, those things I'm not. But it's just that these will get eventually figured out for themselves. I mean, the fact remains, now you have cartoons and graphic narratives or graphic stories part of textbooks, right? Besides being part of university courses or whatever. Imagine a NCERT textbook saying comic. So that kind of a thing is that. So yeah, work in progress.
I mean, this is again, I think, an observation that I've made also, in terms of the term graphic novel coming up, has been very different when it comes to the West and where it has come up for us. The distinction that I have felt is in terms of where the graphic novel terminology came into in the West through the series of like Watchmen and all of those types of comics, where again the genre was superhero, but the way it was being addressed became more serious and mature. And here in India, where what I've seen is that it is the term is associated more with depiction or a story being told which discusses more social or political issues. So I think that is also one kind of a terminological differentiation that I've seen in terms of how it has come up in both the spaces as well. If I'm not wrong, so.
No, I mean, I've seen as many comics using the term graphic novel at the behind the book. So in India, so it's the kind of thing. I mean, for me, the French and the Belgians are the superpowers of comics, right? And they use this term called bande dessinée, which basically means words and pictures, and they don't distinct. So so they've kept it like that, but they have very different audience. The Persepolis has a different audience than let's say Inspector Gordo kind of a thing. So the thrillers and all of that. So they don't distinct. But in terms of the English world, yes, they do, and yeah. So I mean, I know a lot of people who have a collection of graphic novels in that sense, and they probably they like the idea of it. So yeah. So I don't know. I mean, the fact remains, a publisher like Campfire, which is essentially where they're doing comics like Amartya, they also call themselves graphic novels. But now you can't have a graphic novel con, right? But you can have a comic con, right? More people will come if it's a comic con, right? So each medium has its own inherent strengths or advantages in terms of perception, and then and once we go to Comic Con, we talk about graphic novels. That is the mother of
your idea of what a graphic novel is, would graphic novels, which they claim completely to be graphic novels, like let's say The Watchmen or Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, would that fall into that category? Because they would be falling into a very thin line of, they could also be called comics for their genre of just depicting the fantastical world or the comic, the superhero world. So in your thought of it, would those be considered then as graphic novels?
well, just because Neil Gaiman wrote it or Alan Moore wrote it, I mean, does not make it a graphic novel, or does it not make it a comic kind of thing. Fact remains, even Black Panther, for that matter, is essentially talking a lot about sociological stuff in a dystopian America, right? So even that's, how do you say that? Is that a comic or is it a graphic novel? Now, for example, the biggest book of the century, which is *Sapiens*, which is now turned into a graphic novel, but the genre but the kind of aesthetic that they've used is pretty much like a comic. right? And they actually translated a lot of the text into visuals, kind of a thing. Or now Margaret Atwood now doing Handmaid's Tale, as a graphic novel, or is it a comic? I don't know. I don't know. So to say whether it's a graphic novel or a comic, I'm not sure.
So thin line
I'm not
again
sure.
comes to be.
I'm really not sure. And I'm also not, but I'm very sure that a graphic novel con will not work, but a comic con will work, where we would like to see our books to be seen. But behind Telecom, I'm not sure if I want to write a comic either. I'm at that I'm that stretched.
In game studies, which I've been kind of interested in, there are multiple debates about what makes a game a game. Yeah, and
Hmm.
what is the difference between an interactive experience and a game? And what does it mean that you have to win or lose? Is that the idea of points? Can an interactive narrative be a game when it's just a story, but there is no play in that way? And often, like, I mean, this is obviously an endless debate. And I read this really nice line by a game studio actually called Via Musli, which said, "Your game is a game if you say so." And I really actually liked the way that addresses this endless debate, because it's so fluid. What you're saying, like, beyond the market, or beyond, like, oh, comics
Appropriation of
sound,
it.
yeah, like comics sounds very light for this, somber piece of, like, story that I've made. And yet Comic Con, I mean Graphics Con, is stupid. You know it already, right? But so, like, but there is something, and, like, is there a distinction? Is there not? Whatever. So I feel like at some level also it's very like, this is what I think I have made, and so I will call it this. Maybe that could also be like a way to, I don't know, like, make sense
Yeah.
of it. No.
Yeah. So then I don't know that the
Yeah.
binaries work. I think
Yeah.
it's fluid practice. I mean, it's like, what's the difference between film and cinema, right?
Mm.
Uh, you can make a distinction. Yes, you can make a distinction between literature and pulp, for that matter.
Mm.
Um, Comic Con versus Graphic Guild. Graphic Guild would be an organization of practice. Comic Con is a festival of,
Mm.
or an exhibition of comics. That would be the difference. Yeah.
Good that a prompt has come. I think we are moving towards the end of the session as well. So, is it okay if we take a few questions from the
Yes,
audience?
of course.
I think that would be a very interesting thing to see. So, yes, Afan, you have a question? Please go ahead and ask.
Okay, I have two questions, if that's okay. One question is directed to Miss Afra Shafiq, and the other question is
Uh,
directed to Professor Ghosh. So I'm going to start with ma'am. A lot of art and culture has been centered around subversion of expectations. The Gothic was a response to the neoclassical aesthetic of precision in architecture and painting by going back to the grotesque medieval aesthetic, right? So recently, video games, another recent example could be recently video games, especially by independent developers in particular, have reverted to the 90s aesthetic of pixel art in opposition to realistic graphics. So now your aesthetic, this is a very personal question, your aesthetic in particular is very distinct and unique. As I saw in your Where Do the Ants Go? Um, where does this aesthetic derive its subversive quality from? Like, what sort of cliche are you trying to counter with this specific piece of art? I'm very curious to know about this.
Thank you for that question. So, I mean, it's also interesting because when you mention, a reclamation of pixel art, and then you bring Where Do the Ants Go as a question, it's interesting because that is something that I've been sort of mulling over and trying to make sense of and whatever. For me, I feel like the form is very much a result of what the work wants to say. Like, the form the form kind of develops in response to what I'm trying to say through that work in some way. And the pixel form is something that I've come back to repeatedly in many works, not in Sultana's reality, but in works after that, in many works and in different ways for different reasons. And I mean, I think that I find the pixel is like the most basic framing unit of the creation of an image. I find that is a really interesting unit to kind of look at, and this idea of like many pixels kind of making up an image, but each individual pixel actually not really like each individual pixel basically being a container, but also not really being like completely cohesive container on its own. And I kind of like that idea. I like the way that the arrangement of these objects, like if you look at a QR code, for example, it's nothing but the arrangement of multiple squares or multiple pixels in different ways, but then it's just codified information. And so I was kind of interested in like looking at the QR code as an aesthetic form as well, in one of the projects, and which is why I work with the pixel form a lot. In Where Do the Ants Go specifically, I don't know if you've seen the images of that installation, but it's an anthill that I made, which is a sort of large scale anthill. It's about 30 feet high, but it's made in real life, but it's made exactly as if it were made with pixels. So it's 3D pixels, what we call voxels. And I was actually interested in this sort of the project's about multiple things, and I'll take too much time to explain, but I think it was also about the experience of living online, especially in these very immersive game environments, the promise of Web3. And so I was kind of emulating Minecraft. And I actually built this anthill in Minecraft, like in the game Minecraft, and then I kind of recreated that structure in real life. But I don't know if this is like a larger sort of pushback or subversion to a certain aesthetic movement or moment for me as a personal practice yet. I think for me it's more like an enjoyment and an ode to forms that I feel are fascinating.
So it's like a love letter to pixels or
For
voxels.
sure. Yeah, for sure.
I could see the resemblance to Roblox and Minecraft in that architecture work that you made, and I was very impressed by it. It was something I've never seen before in art before, as in the architectural framework. It is very new to me. Now, the second question that I have is for Sir. It's a little bit again a personal question, so you can ask, you can answer that to your best knowledge. There has been a global explosion of politically and socially charged graphic novels as opposed to the comic strip, such as R.K. Lakshman's satire, which you mentioned during the whole panel discussion as well. I remember that you mentioned that the comic strips have gone out and memes have replaced them in a way. And some examples of the graphic novels as opposed to the strips are Joe Sacco's work on the Middle Eastern conflict. You might be aware of Footnotes on Gaza, Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis, as you mentioned it. And in here, closer home, we have Malik Sajad's Munnu. So my question is, do you think such an explosion of quote-unquote serious graphic narratives is yet to occur in India, or has it already happened? And if so, if it has already happened, are there some Indian graphic novel artists that you look up to in particular, and you would like to name so that I can note down and I can read them as well?
In terms of what you just said, there are two different things. Firstly, R.K. Lakshman and graphic narratives, they don't work together. R.K. Lakshman, Mario Miranda, Abu Abraham, Vijayan were actually political cartoonists. Their job was to make a political laugh or make an editorial comment. And that they would do every day in the newspaper, more than editorial comment. Okay? Whether it's a pocket cartoon or an editorial lead. It was the whole idea was to create a chuckle or look at the irony or look at the paradox of the situation. That was probably their job. And that's what their practice was. So they did not get replaced by a meme. They were made to disappear in the newspaper because in the intolerant times that we have started living in, and this is not very recent. This is something as old as last probably 20 or 25 years. I'm talking about that the political cartoon has been the first victim of censorship. You can burn down an office because you didn't like a cartoon. You can use a death threat as because you didn't like a cartoon. You can bring down the paper because you didn't like a cartoon. Because cartoon is a 0-minute read. You have to read an editorial. You have to get past those difficult data and words, right? But a cartoon just takes you 2 seconds to read and make it, and get yourself hurt. You don't have space for humor anymore. So that those forms of political cartoon has been made to disappear very systematically. So, and the graphic novel has not replaced it. What graphic novel is done, the names that you just took are basically more like graphic reportage or graphic retelling. Whether it's the life of a boy in Kashmir, or whether it's the life of a boy in Gaza, they're basically reportage or retellings, or with a sheen of fiction or something like that. But essentially, they're not really replacing the political cartoon in that sense.
I understand.
Yeah. In terms of the people whose practice I follow, I'm usually, again, 4 steps behind what kind of graphic novels that are coming out right now. But I follow a lot of the artists on Instagram, so I know what's happening in Comic Sense, the magazine, and I know what's happening in whether it's in uh, the different anthologies that are coming out. So I have a fair sense of what's really happening. So I keep a tap on that. That's about it. And I try and follow as many of them on Instagram. And yeah.
And I think Amar Chitragatha, which deserves an honorable mention because you mentioned it before, even though it's not a proper graphic novel in a proper sense, but still, it must have acted as some sort of inspiration for drawing, at least for you.
As a matter of fact, no. In the sense, I really enjoyed reading about Amar Chitragatha. I really enjoyed Amar Chitragatha because for me it was a quicker and easier way to get past my history book. So, I want to know about Akbar. Okay, 20 pages, 1 rupee 75 paisa a comic, done with. And we could even hire it for 25 paisa in our childhood, from the bookstore. So, and it was a visual form. You could see the elephants, and you could see the lions, and you could see the beautiful surroundings and all. I was so much into Amar Chitragatha. I mean, and they drew the women so beautifully. At one point of time, I thought my English teacher Usha ma'am had Vasavadatta eyes on her. I was in class 2 or something. That whole world was drawing me in that way. But as you grew by, you stopped reading Amar Chitrakathas. And probably, even if once I will read it, I will read it just for my own trivia, for my own pop quiz abilities. If even now when friends meet, we have these instant pop quizzes. When okay, tell me what's Ravan's wife's name, for example. That came from Amar Chitragatha. So I will just leave it at that. But I will definitely not read an Amar Chitragatha which is uh, which is contemporary right now, because that I have probably grown over that phase, and then and the thing. So I would not really say I was inspired by Amar Chitragatha. So no, but I definitely read it, and at that point of time it did its purpose. Yeah.
Thank you for your.
Thank you so much. Afan has asked absolutely brilliant questions as well, and you answered it all brilliantly as well. Thank you so much. We will just have time for one more question, and we'll have to end the panel then because the time for the next one is about to begin. Anam Kazi asks to Mr. Ghosh, Professor Ghosh, and the question should extend out to Afra ma'am as well, I would say. What would be your advice to budding artists who want to go into writing their own graphic novels or developing, let's say, interactive fiction?
Afra, would you like to go first? Because I would like to think I'm still budding.
Yeah, I mean, I don't a word of advice and all. I don't know. It's too much, But I mean, I think that if you want to write, read. If you want to make games, play. Like, I just feel like spend time with the medium, and then I guess also just open yourself out to the world around you and kind of sharpen what your own voice is, and then it doesn't matter like what form or whatever you end up doing it in, but just kind of be in tune with your own voice is, I think, important if you want to make something.
And absolutely, yes. I mean, I just, if you're into gaming, then play as many number of games. If you want to read, if you want to create a book and read that kind of thing, so that, you can find something. If you want to make a film, watch as many number of films. Don't just pick up your camera and do it one day, because, you won't even know where to begin. So I would just say read, try, play, whatever. Be engaged with the form first and then get into practice. And when you get into practice, please remember one thing. This is where I would really like to give advice, because this is something I've personally suffered from. Your first work will never be the perfect work. Chances are even your last work will never be the perfect work. It will always be work in progress. So just start.
I think that was some solid advice given by both of you. Absolutely thankful that both of you made out the time and were here. Thank you so much. And sir, absolutely grateful specifically to you because I personally am a fan of yours. Because I told I didn't told you before this well. It was a coincidence that a friend of mine, you had been to Lexicon and got an autograph of yours in a postcard for me. And a few days later, I was able to approach you and have you for this panel. I mean, that was a good series of events, and I was actually looking very much forward to you being here on campus and getting to interact with it. Specifically,
I'm honored.
also, yes,
I'm honored. I've never heard that before. Yeah.
yes. So I have your autograph with the postcard right now, and and specifically me, I've been working in graphic director spaces since throughout my bachelor's, now up till master's. Even my dissertation has been on graphic director spaces. So this is a space that is something that I feel, I will be uptaking and going on with. That is why I just wanted to be on the end of asking also questions for that. So thank you both for being here.
I just have one thank you to Hey, but I was thinking now that you guys have Afra's thing as a course paper, I would be very interested in reading students' takes and papers on it
Yeah, of course I would be also.
because I have seen it at a very close level and then I've been off it. So
Yeah.
I haven't really formed a perspective on it because probably those images are too strong in my head when the thing was getting made. So I would definitely love to see 10 years later how students are reacting to it. That's something I would be interested in.
Of course. We will definitely send out something if we have here being written on from Am's works, and that is that we will send it, of course, to you.
Okay. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank
So
you.
it's been a
Thank you.
wonderful
The
conversation.
recording for the session will also be available, ma'am, in a couple of days. We are recorded the whole session. It will be on YouTube. We'll send out the links to the panelists and all the chairs and everything. So thank you so much. We had participants from all across as well because the first day of the uh, festival had a national interdisciplinary conference. So at this moment, we have students from across India joining in to listen to you all. So it's not just AMU students; it's from across India. So thank you for
But
doing
now
this.
we would like to thank AMU. So thank you for having
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll have you on campus sometime soon.
Hopefully. Thank you. Bye bye. Take care.
Yes. Bye.
Thank you everybody for attending. Bye bye.